It is hard to understand the power of the Easter story if one does not understand the story that led to Easter. So before we move fully into celebration, I want to tell you about that story of dire times. Jesus's followers ignored the warning signs that Jesus was being targeted. His follower Thomas pledged that he would be loyal, and yet when the time came, his actions betrayed that loyalty. Things were bad, and then they got worse. Jesus was mocked, tortured, and left to die. The first gospel to tell the story of the resurrection actually included no resurrection story at all. Mark 16 ended at verse 8. This is where we see Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome go to where Jesus was executed, the tomb, with the plan to embalm Jesus's body and give him a proper burial. When they arrived, they discovered that his body was missing. We know from historical records of their times, as well as our times, that the bodies of political dissidents are often desecrated. So finding no body at all was the worst possible discovery. And to make things odder and stranger and more confusing, there was that man who was hanging out at the tombs who told these three women that Jesus had preceded them to Galilee and that they would discover him there. Always good to take the advice of strange men. What we learn at the very end of Mark 16, line 8, was that these three women fled in terror and told no one. Hardly an auspicious beginning. And yet, this is the story of Easter. This is the story of resurrection. This is the story when things began to turn around. See, we know that Jesus's followers somehow took this story of trauma and turned it into a story of good news or gospel story. The original English root words for gospel, God and spell, literally mean good and story, the gospel story. And so they were able to create this gospel story, this Easter story. But how is this Easter story alive for us today? It's alive for us because I believe that we too are living a dire story. For the last several decades, and I believe moving towards its climax, we have heard a story of the human desecration of our planet. And this moment is coming down to what we as Earth followers will or will not do about it. See, just like the early Jesus followers, we too are getting all the warning signs that we need. Now, it's really understandable over the past year, we as a species have been really focused on our well-being. But before we felt threatened by COVID-19, the warning alarms were already going off. A little over 2 years ago, we received the particularly bad news. And this was that human impact since 1970 has decimated mammal bird, fish, and reptile wildlife at an average decrease of 60% in species populations. 3 years ago, we were told that we have 12 years to radically change our relationship with energy and our impact on the planet to prevent a cataclysmic catastrophe. That means we only have 9 years left. We surely are in our own Good Friday moment. And yet, I have hope this Easter morning, and I hope that you feel invited into a hopeful stance with me. Now, the early Jesus followers offer their example to us. And one of the most powerful things that they did to turn this story around were to share stories of hope and faith. They spoke about what Jesus did in his life, what his messages were, and how they were living their lives by Jesus's example. They also spoke about how they knew that Jesus would return, and not just in 1,000 years or 2,000 years or at the end of time, but in a mere 20 or 40 years. And what was more is that Jesus would return to an earthly paradise. There they would gather as a caring, intentional, faithful community surrounded by the bounty of the earth. They imagined that this earth would be the home of their beloved community. I know this earth to be the home of our beloved community. What we need is a type of creative, subversive imagination, the kind of imagination that will change the world. And we need to tell certain stories in order to turn this Good Friday moment into an Easter moment. Let me share with you the stories that work. These are the stories that can help us communicate our values in the face of and across any polarization. First, tell stories of how you have experienced the climate crisis in your own life. Talk about how seasons are different, how they begin and end at different points, how weather patterns have changed. In my life, I can't believe that I see floods without rain, how summers are hotter, how fires are burning across our lands and others, how paradise burned, how there are so many hurricanes some years that we run out of names for them. Let's talk about how green initiatives are like other types of insurance. I don't actually think that my house will burn down, but I have fire insurance nonetheless. When we spend $1 greening our impact, we prevent $10 worth of environmentally caused devastation, which includes our homes and our roads and our schools and our very lives. Let's talk about how green jobs are good jobs, how they not only feed families, but also give all of us cleaner air to breathe. And finally, let's not forget how powerful the language of spirituality is. Let's talk about the wonder and wisdom we receive from the earth. In fact, let's invite others to experience it with us. go and walk upon this sacred earth. Let us know that the air that we breathe is sacred. Know that we are on holy ground. Now, there will likely be 30 to 35% of people who just won't accept climate science and believe that we should not or need not take a stand. The goal isn't to convince them. No, it is rather to activate those who do believe, including us and perhaps people like us most particularly, that we need to significantly change our impact and imprint on the earth. And we need to convince about another 10% of people who are currently on the fence to join us. The early Christians faced worse odds, yet somehow a small group of adherents managed to create a religion with the largest number of followers globally today. They reshaped the world by telling a story of hope in the face of dire news and by offering a paradise here on earth. If you believe, as I do, that this earth is a paradise worth saving and worth passing on to the generations to come, then let's utilize these examples of evangelism and commitment that are offered to us within the Easter story. May future generations gathered on Easter talk about how we lived a life of faithfulness and joined others in saving our world. May it be so. Happy Easter. So glad you're with us. Let us go and bless this holy ground. Amen.